Welcome to the wonderful world of wine, exploring all things wine with you. We are your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lindsay, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our holiday show here on The Wonderful World of Wine. Mark and I are excited to talk to our old friend and Italian wine specialist, Ciro Pirone. Ciro, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kim.
Good.
Thank you. And thanks to Mark for having me.
Ciro,
We're-
great to have you on the show. We've always talked with amongst ourselves here, Kim and I. You are the man for Italian wine, and the holidays are here. And we figured you were the guy we need our listeners to hear from to get them through the holidays with pairing food and wine. So I'm excited to finally talk with you, Ciro.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, guys, and very excited about the time of the year. And I love Christmas. I love all the foods that come with it. And obviously the wine pairings might as well be more traditional or might as well be some new experiments. And definitely looking forward to share with you guys.
Well, we're always excited to talk about food and talk about wine, and and it's always fun to have a friend on the show. For our listeners who are not familiar with Ciro, he is a native Italian. He is an Italian wine scholar and one of our go-to guides for Italian wine. He's the Italian wine director at Horizon Beverage, and he and I have been colleagues and friends for quite a few years, from back in the day when I was just starting in the business. And Ciro, do you want to give a little bit of your background to people so that they have a little bit of an idea of where you're coming from and why they should listen to you about wine?
Yeah, no, thank you for the intro. And yes, my name is Ciro Pirone, and I'm from originally from Salerno, which is a nice, smaller city, if you will, located in southern Italy. To be more exact, in Campania, which is a region of southern Italy, and more specifically, about 45 minutes south of Naples, which is the bigger city. And as a point of reference, obviously the Amalfi Coast, many people might be familiar with, and used to be really my backyard once upon a time. And when I was in Salerno, I studied hospitality at the Istituto Alberghiero in Salerno, which is the hospitality institute. And from then, I basically started traveling during summer months when I was still in school, traveling to Sardinia or other areas of Italy where they become very touristy and popular during the summer months. And then sometimes in the winter, I would go work on the Italian Alps, obviously being very important ski areas and whatnot. And then as I completed my studies, eventually I started traveling a little bit here and there. I went to London first and foremost, both to learn English as well as, experience something beyond the Italian boundaries. And I obviously I enjoyed the industry. I enjoyed learning, meeting a lot of different people all over the place. And finally, in 1999, I landed here in Boston, and that's where I've been since. And always working in hotels and restaurants until 2007, which is when I started working for Horizon Beverage, which is a wholesaler here in Massachusetts, and also, Rhode Island and previously New Hampshire. And practically my background is all been food and wine, and specifically Italian wines. And that's what I've been trying to, specialize myself working for Horizon Beverage, obviously representing not only Italian culture and traditions when it comes to food and wine, but also our Italian portfolio, doing a variety of different activities. Might as well be events, wine dinners, educational stuff, obviously day-to-day sales for what we do in our industry. And it's been great. And now it's been 16 years, and obviously I'm committed to the industry. I try to continue and educate myself as well. I think it's important. And obviously, Italian wines are a big part of my daily life. And I love talking about that, as you guys are as well. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Some of our longtime listeners and members of Mark's Wine Club might remember a set and wine pairing event that we did many years ago.
Yeah.
Above Mark's store. I remember that very well, and it was a blast. And you have very strong opinions about pizza here in the States. And it was just a great conversations that we had that night.
I stem from my Neapolitan grandmother's core, where she was always known in the neighborhood for being somebody that never lied, always spoke her mind. And sometimes you might make some enemies by doing that, but I try to stay truth to what I believe certain things might be when it comes to pizza, especially as you know, in really one of the most characteristic foods of Campania and Salerno and Naples. And I gotta speak my mind. That's all.
That's right. Stay true to Nonna.
True.
First, let's start out. I want to talk about Christmas Eve and the tradition of the Feast of the Seven Fishes. And I'm curious your take on it. Talk to Kim about this in depth, and she does celebrate this. And I'm curious, is this something that is big in Italy? And is this something you do now?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways to look at this. Where for me, growing up in southern Italy, obviously we Christmas Eve, which is the biggest day, probably even bigger than Christmas Day itself, not just for the food part, although the food part's always been huge, but also waiting that Santa will arrive at midnight and then go to mass and all that. And for us in southern Italy, it's all about seafood. So Christmas Eve was always the big day where you would have seafood in every possible preparation. And obviously different types of seafood being in the Mediterranean. You have a huge variety of, might as well be shellfish, might as well be different type of fishes. And again, prepared in different ways. But if you ask the same question to somebody from the northern part of Italy, it's not necessarily the case. They have different cuisine. They don't necessarily do seafood the whole way. And that's interesting because then you come here in the United States and you hear a lot, comes this time of the year, about the Feast of Seven Fishes. One thing I have to say, in Italy, we never had necessarily seven fish preparations or seven fishes. There was not an exact number. I did a little bit of research to find out that supposedly the seven comes from the number of the seven.
Seven sacraments.
The seven sacraments, exactly. So supposedly it's where the number seven comes from. But that being said, like I said, we never did such a number, but ultimately, yes, because in southern Italy, the coastline, it's very important. You have a lot of seafood. For us, obviously, when it comes to seafood, bacala, which is the salted codfish, where basically, as the tradition goes, it would be caught at a certain time of the year. And then eventually, before refrigeration was available, before anything like that, be preserved by basically packing the fish after it was filleted and obviously gutted, will be packed with salt. So salt will basically dehydrate the fish, take all the moisture and water out, and the fish could be hung for very, very long period of times. And then came the time of preparing the fish. Obviously, you have to soak the fish for literally like sometimes 3 to 4 days, changing the water a couple of times a day, because again, you got to take away all that salt and saltiness from the fish, and also rehydrate the fish. And eventually from this like kind of like skinny dried out piece of fillet of fish, you get this beautiful fillet which really rises up to become sometimes a couple of inches high. And that's something that it's huge, because we would do it sometimes just like floured and fried, sometimes in tomato preparations. We'd also do a salad with it, with nice beautiful green olives, a squeeze of lemon, extra virgin olive oil, fresh parsley, very simply. So bacala, anyway, has always been a huge part of the feast of the fish, if you will, at our table. And as a matter of fact, I still do go buy it in local places here, around the South Shore, and make it, here at home. Then with that, obviously, we have lots of, mussels, might as well be clams, razor clams, obviously shrimp, fresh anchovies, which would be prepared in a variety of ways. But for us, first and foremost, you always have an antipasto, which is, seafood antipasto. Could be an octopus salad, could be shrimp salad. Then pasta becomes, being Italian, obviously, is always a big part of our meal. And usually you would have a pasta with either a saute of shellfish, which, again, we just don't have clams and mussels, but we have a variety of those. Might as well be razor clams, might as well be telline, which is a kind of a very sweet, tiny type of shellfish found commonly in the Mediterranean Sea. Or we have another type of shellfish which is quite delicious. It's called datteri, which means dates, just like the dry fruits, because the shells actually have the same shape and same color of the dry dates if you look at them, and they're very succulent and very delicious. And then we move on to basically a couple more preparation for entree, if you will, where you could have, like I said, the bacala in different ways. Then you typically have a fritto misto, which is a mixed fried seafood preparation where you would have, calamari, shrimp, sometimes cuttlefish, and a piece of bacala, and you just nice squeeze of lemon to kind of freshen up the fried quality of the preparation. Then obviously dessert wouldn't be fish in that case, but yeah, that wouldn't be we do love fish, but not that much. So here, obviously, as I got married and my wife's family, Christmas Eve was never really a big deal. For them, it was always like Christmas Day. And eventually being a family and getting children, and as the kids got older and we have our own house, bigger space and whatnot, that was a big thing for me personally that I wanted to introduce, because I wanted to bring back this obviously beautiful memory of growing up and having the family together on Christmas Eve. And finally, I was able to do it a few years ago. And since every Christmas Eve, we invite everybody to our house, and I cook for everybody, and I try to make as much as possible seafood, knowing that the selections are a bit more limiting here. But that being said, I try to carry on that tradition, which I dearly love. Some years I might introduce a little bit of meat too, just because you want to change it up. You don't want to get too boring with cooking, which is very exciting to me. But I do quite a bit of a spread of different fish dishes, and I serve them in different courses, because I believe also that it should be served, depending upon what it is, obviously, but it should be served warm. Fish shouldn't be cooked and just left there to hang out for 40 minutes before you eat it. And so it's been a wonderful thing, and everybody's been loving it. And so we'll continue to do it. And actually, we were talking about this last night, but over the next couple of days, I'll be doing a little bit of research, because, I love to bring back the tradition of doing spaghetti with clams, spaghetti alle vongole, very simply, obviously. But I also want to introduce something that is a little bit more flair. So this year I might also do pasta e fagioli con le cozze, which is pasta e fagioli, obviously the very famous traditional Neapolitan dish. But we do a preparation with mussels, which are part of the dish. So it kind of involves a little bit the sea and a little bit the land. Becomes very hearty, has got a little bit of salty quality from the mussels, but still has that kind of a sticky quality of a nice thick pasta e fagioli. So we'll see. Everything gets up for grab at this point, but excited for the Christmas Eve coming. Usually I start early in the morning, and I have to say that, yes, obviously the Feast of Seven Fishes and all fish and whatnot, but I think sides usually also are in Southern Italy anyhow. Sides are very, very relevant, a huge part of that meal.
That sounds like a ton of food. And now I have to kind of go back, Ciro, because I picked Kim's brain. She does this celebration, and she mentioned a lot of what you said you have.
Many similarities. I'm like chomping at the bit to talk about it.
Here's my question to both of you now. So do you just have one wine for the whole night, one style, or what do you each pair with that on that night?
I have a whole bunch of stuff. It's my husband's family that this is the tradition that they do. My family does it a little bit now, but I didn't grow up with it. So I was really only introduced to this tradition when I married into their family, but they go gung-ho every single year for all of this stuff. I love that you started with the bacala, Ciro, because that is like my husband's number one thing that he looks forward to on Christmas Eve. Like, you have to have the bacala. And my in-laws spend, you're right, it's like 3 days getting this thing ready. Right. And the way that I tend to handle wine at family holidays is I just bring a whole selection of stuff and open a few things and let people sort of graze through what wine they want to drink with what food. I'll give some people some pointers, but I generally let it be almost like the wine buffet, like have some of this and then have some of this. But I do try to do some things that I know are going to go well with a variety of foods.
What do you do with the salted fish, Kim? Is there something you like?
Our family makes so we shred it after it's been rehydrated and, had all that salt removed from it. And then we mix it almost with like a batter and make like little fritters out of it.
And
like
what
little
do you
fried
pair
cakes.
It with?
Something white.
Italian, right?
I usually bring Italian for Christmas Eve. Absolutely. So I would do, I don't know, a whole variety of different things. Depends on the year.
So there are so many Italian whites that do have this like salinity thing going on. Is that something you recommend when you're doing that?
Yes, obviously, it's always great to think about wine and food pairing, and it's exciting. But as Kim also mentioned, obviously for me, yes, everything is Italian. I do not own one single bottle of non-Italian wine. But but that aside is the fact that because it's a lot of seafood, because it's like you said, might as well be the bacala fritters, or might as well be, like I said, the shellfish or octopus, seafood salad and whatnot. Ideally, yes, this kind of a briny, slightly savory, salty wines, and might as well be a nice verdicchio from Marche, or obviously from Campania. We have beautiful things like Fiano di Avellino, Falanghina, but also Sicilian white. I think many things can be a great accompaniment, like a good grillo, if you will. But I also realized that it's hard because not only you cannot serve just white wines, because some people like to have red. It doesn't matter what you're eating, and I get it. So I end up actually a few years ago, because my wife does as I decide the menu, the 3 or 4 courses, whatever we're gonna do, she puts together on her computer a little actual menu that we put on the table. So it becomes a fun thing to do. And a few years ago, we actually used to list a couple of wines that would be the wines we would be serving. And then I realized, what, might as well be an open field, knowing that people are going to like a little bit of everything. Ultimately, yes, as far as I think the best pairing, understandably, white wines are number one. And white wines, as you both know, Italian wines, you can go in many different directions, because you can go from the lighter style, crisp, very fragrant, high acid whites, to definitely things that tend to change direction and become more full bodied, more important on the palate, good minerality, but also good structure. But ultimately, also some lighter style reds. When you think about things maybe not from my neck of the woods, like Schiava from Alto Adige, or also lighter style Valpolicella or Etna, obviously, which are very exciting wines that have this kind of a volcanic element, but also herbaceous and slightly salty. So you can really. Have I opened Amarone and Brunello before? Yes, I'm not going to say no, just because I know some people are going to appreciate it. And so might as well share. That's the time of the year to do it. But I do think that obviously Italian wines, they offer an incredible amount of not only diversity, but also opportunity to match the food and wine. And especially comes on Christmas Eve with so much variety of seafood at the table.
I'm glad you mentioned some red wines there. What was the local red wine that you had from Campania that you would pair with fish?
Well, I would say Campania, it's a bit tough, just because obviously Aglianico is the main grape red, and it's definitely more on the tannin side, so probably not ideal. But there are some reds, maybe from the Amalfi Coast area, which they tend to be more lighter style reds, and they can do a nice job. But I think when you think about Campania reds, for the most part, you think about more like hardy red wines, because obviously come from the inland part of Campania, the mountains, the Irpinia region, where the cuisine tends to be a bit more like red sauce and pork preparations. So I would definitely go more into other regions if I have to select some lighter style red wines that can be a good pairing with seafood cuisine anyhow.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. For more information about Kim, you can go to her website at commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, you can go to franklinliquors.com. Today is our holiday episode, and we're so happy to have our guest, Ciro Pirone from Horizon Beverage, Italian wine director, and the expert in our area on Italian wine. And if you want to find him, you can get him on Instagram at Divino Boston. And we're also on Instagram at The Wonderful World of Wine. Happy holidays to everybody. So exciting to have Ciro here today. We talked about things for Christmas Eve and the Feast of the Seven Fishes. And Kim and Ciro celebrate that. And I just usually have wine on Christmas Eve. So I'm not a big seafood guy. But next year, I want to talk about pasta dishes, because I saw a stat that said something like there's 350 different types of pasta. And I thought it was interesting. Earlier, you mentioned how people in different areas of Italy have different traditions and different foods. And it also goes with wine grapes. Like there's how many official Italian wine grapes now, Ciro?
Well, registered, they're roughly 600, but although there's many more which are not registered because there hasn't been enough research to say that they're actually all are other grapes rather than being just a biotype, one of the already registered grapes, but currently roughly around 600.
So 600 different grapes and 350 different pastas. So what is the key when pairing pasta and wine? Is it the sauce or the weight of the dish, or what is your opinion on pairing wine with pasta?
Well, what you mentioned about the 350 types of pasta and obviously the 600 something grapes, and that list could go on endlessly when it comes to apples and tomatoes and pears and all sorts of vegetables and salads and radicchio and whatnot. And that really goes a long way to speak about the biodiversity of Italy, which is really something which is amazing, probably the biggest biodiversity of any country in the world, which obviously ultimately the different grains will give you different types of pasta made in different ways. But what you referred to specifically is obviously the different shapes of pasta, because Italians, we're so probably crazily or madly in love with pasta that you have to have a specific shape for specific pasta preparations. And it really makes me think about when I talk to my parents, because I talk to them almost daily. I'm driving somewhere, I call them, and I'm like, oh, what did you cook today, to my mom, or what did you guys have? And she might say, I made pasta and chickpeas or pasta and lentils, something simple, traditional dish of the time. And my dad always in the background is like, yeah, but she didn't use the right pasta. Well, here you go. Because again, for certain pasta, like, pasta and potatoes, for example, might be one of the most traditional peasant dishes of the poor farmer tradition, which you had nothing, you just had pasta and potatoes. And really is one of the most wonderful and flavorful dishes you'll ever taste. But you need this pasta called pasta mista, which is basically a bag of pasta you can buy in stores, also find here, where instead of having one type of shape of pasta, you have a mix of like 5-6 different type of pasta. Obviously, they're going to be cooking at the same time. And that's the type of traditional pasta used for that preparation. So that goes to say that basically for each recipe, might as well be, spaghetti aglio olio in a very simple way, or might as well be like a trofie with pesto, which obviously trofie being another type of pasta, homemade, kind of curly, or might as well be fettuccine alla bolognese, or maybe lasagna somewhere else. Each recipe really requests its own a variation of shape of pasta, if you will. And then within that world, obviously, not only we have the dry pasta, but as you know, there's also fresh pasta, there's egg-based pasta. So there's different things. Now, when it comes to my opinion, anyway, matching wine with pasta, I think it's all about the sauce, because ultimately, if you're just boiling pasta and put a little bit of olive oil, it doesn't matter the shape, you're still going to have the same result for the most part, other than different texture in your mouth. But the sauce will definitely dictate what you're going to pair with. Because again, when it comes to pasta, it's really an incredibly diverse world of preparations. And I love pasta. I like to cook in different ways. When you think about pesto, right? Obviously you might make trofie or trenette, which is another local type of pasta. Very fresh sauce, just literally made with basically pine nuts, extra virgin olive oil, a clove of garlic, fresh basil, and basically 50-50 pretty much of Parmigiano and Pecorino. And then, obviously you put it in a mortar, you squash it down, and then you toss it with pasta. That kind of preparation, you need a very lively, fresh, maybe pigato or vermentino from Liguria. But obviously, when you're thinking about, like I said, a risotto alla pescatora, which is a seafood risotto that we make very commonly in Campania and other parts of southern Italy, maybe you do need a wine being a risotto. Yes, there's no butter. Yeah, there's no cheese in that case because it's seafood risotto. You want to taste the freshness of the dish and the kind of salty quality and the seafood element to it. Maybe you put a good Greco di Tufo, a white wine that is almost like the structure of red wine with some tannins to it. Obviously, if you go to Emilia Romagna and you have Bolognese, now things start shifting very differently in a very different direction, because there it's when you start needing maybe a good Sangiovese di Romagna. So something, there's a good acidity, It's going to freshen up the palate, and it's going to give you this kind of cleansing quality that is necessary, especially when you have something like bolognese. Or ultimately, for example, if you're in the same region, you have tortellini in brodo. Tortellini, obviously, we all know is the stuffed pasta with, locally, they do with meat. Other times can be just with cheese or ricotta or pieces of ham, depending on what, and sometimes just cooked in the classic local broth, almost like a vegetable broth, or sometimes it's like a chicken broth. So a very simple dish. And you can also have a nice lambrusco di sorbara. So, I think when it comes to pasta, because there are so many preparations with so many possible variables of ingredients and richness of the dish, of very simple, clean, everyday dish, it just will marry pretty much every wine of the 600 varietals, as long as you do the right ingredients with the right dish, and obviously paired up with the right wine.
Well, I'm really hungry now after listening to all of that.
Yeah, it seems like Italian wine. What's the old saying? What grows together goes together. Yeah, I mean, it's like the perfect food wine. I always tell people when you're having food, you can always find something from Italy that goes with the dish. And like Kim said, you just made us all hungry. You made the town proud, because there's a lot of Italians here in Franklin, Ciro. So I'm sure people are, like Kim, very hungry right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, my saying has always been, because I see a lot of people love meat. I mean, I do enjoy meat every once in a while, but I see people eating a lot of meat, a lot of steaks, a lot of stuff. And I always tell my wife, I'd rather have as a last wish a nice dish of pasta. Because I think it's something that I love cooking. Always makes me feel like home. It's also inexpensive, really. It kind of fills you up, and not only that, ultimately it brings back great memories, because for us, growing up in Italy myself, and especially Southern Italian, even today, obviously I don't live there for 24 years now, but my dad, every single day, he has for lunch anyway, he has pasta as one of the courses. So it's really embedded in our DNA. I don't eat it as much anymore, because obviously, as you guys know, here our main meal is dinner. So obviously you want to have a variation of the fish and meat and this and that. But I do still incorporate pasta quite a bit in our diet, and I try to also cook it a lot for the kids, make sure they appreciate it, and they seem to so far. So we'll see if it changes. But it's definitely a good ride.
I've never heard of kids growing out of a love of pasta. So
Well, believe it or not, I mean, when my daughter was, she was in daycare. I can't remember what age specifically it was. I think my wife was out of town, and I had made the night before pasta with clams, right? And the morning after, my mother-in-law was excited to leave out early for work, and my mother-in-law was here to bring to school, and I left everything there ready for her to, for the lunch. And I sent her to school with the pasta with clams. And,
how'd that go over?
I definitely went over well with her. She loved it, because she loves clams and mussels and all that. I'm not sure what other people thought, but it didn't really matter to me, to be honest.
I think that's a typical story that you hear of people who are from immigrant families, and you send whatever your traditional food is, for school lunches. And sometimes you get some strange looks. My son also really, really likes shellfish and clams and things. And even when he was really little, he would order spaghetti alla vongole at a restaurant, and he was like 6 years old. He always got some interesting looks, like, really? You're going to eat that? And he's like, yeah, I love this.
Yeah, your children are very adventurous.
My kids are very good eaters. Yes. They love their food. I think it's important too. And especially like all this stuff you've been talking about it's so much of the food that you're cooking is tied back to your memories of childhood. And I love hearing those kinds of stories from people, because that idea of food and flavor and aromas and all of those being tied to memory and good feelings and happy childhood days it's a wonderful thing to be able to pass down to the next generation and be like, look, these are the things that I ate when I was a kid. I'm bringing them here to you. And to see our kids enjoying them, that has been one of the best things about parenthood, is passing on those things to my kids.
Yeah, I'm curious from both of you, like when I grew up in an Italian home, we had pasta all the time. Like every meal, I mean, Thanksgiving was turkey and pasta. It's pasta. But I never noticed, only when I got a lot older, that I noticed my dad had like the traditional Chianti or something on the table. I never really noticed the wine. And I'm curious, when you two were growing up, I know, Kim, you also had pasta, right? A lot with the meals.
We had a lot of pasta. We were
notice
not
wine on the table?
We were not a drinking family. I did not grow up with wine on the table. So we were one of those, yeah. We were more New Englanders than we were second or third generation Italians. We did eat a lot of quote unquote Italian food, but it was a lot more Americanized Italian food for my family. Yeah. My husband's family, on the other hand, was much more traditional. And I don't know why, if it was Boston Italians versus New York, New Jersey Italians, but for some reason, our family down there really held on to food traditions a lot more than our family.
I do remember my dad a lot like to rub wine on the kids' lips when they were young for some reason. Is that an Italian thing, Ciro, where the Italians like rubbing wine?
Well, you see, wine is not in our culture anyway. It's not just an alcoholic beverage or just a beverage that you enjoy, just to get drunk or when you're having fun or something like that. It's always been a beverage of the tradition, but more than that, obviously part of your diet, especially several decades past. So families never looked at it. Some things like, oh my God, don't have any because one day you might become an alcoholic or something crazy. I mean, in our family, there's always wine on the table. My dad really having a glass, he would have a glass of wine with lunch, a glass of wine with dinner. That was it. It was not like never any exaggeration in any form or shape. My mom never really drank. I mean, she would have literally and the glasses we used were obviously the tumblers, those kind of glasses at the glass. And she would have a little bit. I remember my grandmother, my father's mom, when she lived with us, she would have a little bit of wine, but especially in the summer months, she would, interesting enough, mix it with the Sprite. The reason being because she never really loved the dry, sometimes wine being too dry, maybe in the summer it was hot, and so you want something a little sweeter, who knows? And that was the case. When it comes to us, I mean, my dad always, from what I remember, obviously when I remember, my dad always offers like, listen, have a sip of wine. If you want to try, it's there, knowing that it would never be something I would go out and try to drink a lot of it or anything. I personally was never very much interested in. The reason being because we drank water all the time when it was a birthday party or some sort of celebration. Obviously, the 1.5 liter, 2 liter of Coca-Cola and Fanta would show up, but that was the only time. So never really had an acquired taste for, especially wine, which would be something dry. And when it comes to my memories, especially wine, it would be my father would go to the local store and buy the Demijohn, the 5 liter Demijohn of the local wine. That was really the case at the time, which I feel like if it happened today, in most cases would be a quite oxidized vinegar wine, because usually takes you a while, especially when it's one person drinking, it's 5 liters. And by the time you're finishing that Demijohn, it becomes, quite vinegary and oxidized. And then, comes holidays, especially Christmas Eve, but New Year's Eve, another big celebration, families and gatherings and whatnot. Obviously, there would be a bit more of a bottled wine, and especially when it comes to the sparkling, spumante was always a big deal. Some of the sweeter versions of the Asti spumante, because again, at the end of a meal with the panettone or pandoro, the classic dessert cakes that you can buy also here very commonly these days. You have a glass of that also because it's celebratory, or some people might have had something a bit more important, like a Franciacorta, Trento Doc, if you like something a bit drier. Obviously, Prosecco wasn't a thing way back then. And you would have a glass of sparkling. And also another very actually interesting, as you mentioned, dish and thing that still existing a long time ago and still carries on today, and it's specifically prepared not on Christmas Eve but actually New Year's. It's called zampone lenticchia, which is basically this sausage that is cooked with lentils, because lentils in our culture is meant to bring good luck and money. So every New Year's Eve, you eat this dish at the end. Basically, you wait the midnight after you had your own meal and all that. You wait the midnight, and as people celebrate the New Year's coming, you have a couple of spoonfuls of lentils with a little bit of this zampone, which is a sausage cooked in the lentils, so it's quite tender. And the hope is that those lentils turn into money for the New Year. At least you hope. Never happened, but again, you keep the tradition is quite fun.
I might need to do that for my New Year's Eve party this year.
Yeah. And obviously, that's a dish that it marries quite well a variety of red wines, honestly, because the lentils are hearty. Obviously, there's the sausage in it. So that's when you can play quite a bit with some more robust and interesting red wines.
I have to tell you, I had such a hard time convincing my wife the pasta thing, Cheryl, when we were first married. And to this day, she finally puts pasta out with turkey on Thanksgiving. But she
my family still fights about it.
Yeah, she refused. Did you have that situation with your wife, Cheryl, where you had to kind of get her onto your traditions with the food, or was she? So
let's put it this way: I would love to bring some. We don't do Thanksgiving here because it's. I love the holiday. I love the family holiday. I don't care too much for the meal itself, although I eat the turkey. But and also having a family, she's one of four. So, someone else, typically her brother used to be her dad way back then, but typically her brother is the one that hosts Thanksgiving. And we went there this year, as in the past years, and he makes a roasted turkey and a fried turkey and then all the various sides and things like that. And I would like sometimes to show up with a dish of pasta, but I refrain myself also because I'm like, they're going to be like, oh, here you go, the Italian has to bring pasta even on Thanksgiving. So usually
we argue every year about lasagna on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I don't even try. The reason being because I feel like no matter what, we show up at 2:00. You have 2.5 hours worth of appetizers.
So true.
Usually I'm in charge of the antipasto. Again, it's like, here you go. That's the Italian.
There's your Italian thing.
Yeah, let him buy his prosciutto, salame, and a variety of cheeses and whatnot. And, you stuff yourself with all these other things that are there. And then comes the time to eat, and you have turkey, and you have mashed potatoes, and you have the vegetables, and whatever else is there. And it's like, even if there was pasta, I wouldn't be able to eat it.
Mm-hmm. That's why I save the pasta for Easter. So we have it on Christmas, and we have it on Easter.
Yeah. So Thanksgiving, I let it be the traditional American holiday with traditional New England or American food, and I step out of the kitchen.
And you bring the wine, right? The important
obviously
job.
that's a no-brainer. Sometimes because again we live in Weymouth, they're in Abington, literally like 7 minutes away. Sometimes I get sent back for seconds.
So I need to figure out a way to incorporate lobster into our Christmas Eve Feast of the Seven Fishes. The only time I've hosted was during COVID, so I don't have that one quite yet.
I did it before. Obviously, it's very nice. It's just it's a lot of work because it doesn't matter how you prepare the lobsters. You gotta either you split them in half and saute them, or you boil them first, take the meat out, and then make whatever preparation. It's a lot of work just because you gotta shell all the lobsters, and it's
Well, I figured to have a little bit of a New England influence. Maybe clam chowder. Clam chowder might be a good one to do instead.
Yeah.
Italian American feast, right?
Well, you adapt.
The Seven Fishes is an Italian American thing.
And I wonder how much of that is because so many Italian immigrants to the U.S. are Southern Italians as opposed to Northern Italians. And, if this was your tradition growing up where you grew up, it was probably fairly common for a lot of other immigrant families from Italy over the course of the last 150 years.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. I mean, it's a very, very true where the Feast of Seven Fishes has become an Italian-American thing, and some other families, not necessarily Italian-American, might abide to or enjoying doing because, yes, a lot of Italians, or anyway, a few generations back, Italians, they are from Southern Italy, especially post World War II, and rather Northerners. Because I have a bunch of friends here from Northern Italy, might as well be Bergamo or some other cities, and they tell me when we talk about it, it's like, I didn't grow up. I mean, for us, besides for them, Christmas Eve number one, wasn't as big of a celebration as it is in southern Italy. Christmas
Oh,
Day.
interesting.
Yeah, Christmas Day is more the celebration. Christmas Eve is almost like another day. You have dinner, maybe you go to church, obviously, and then you celebrate Christmas the day after. But for sure, the seafood part wasn't part of. Yeah, think about it. I mean, when you don't have the sea necessarily nearby, you are in Milano, or you are in like somewhere by the Alps or in Piemonte, or even in the heart of Italy, in Umbria, or whatever, something like that. Fish is not the most readily available thing. So they're going to have totally different preparations altogether.
Piero, the last thing I had to ask you was, is there any Italian Christmas traditions that you don't see here in America?
When it comes to
in general, it doesn't have to be food or wine, just anything with Santa Claus or Christmas trees. I mean, I'm just curious, in Italy, is there things different, or are they same at Christmas time as far as traditions? Are there Christmas trees in Italy? I'm asking stupid questions, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, for sure. Christmas tree, obviously. No, everything is the same. I mean, for the most part, is the same when it comes to, obviously a time of the year there is, well, number one, for sure, the fact that Italy being such a Catholic, Christian, a religious country, having Rome and the Pope and this and that, there is more that element of the going to church and, the religious aspect, aside from the gift giving and all this, the consumism, which is obviously very, very big everywhere in Italy as well these days. But that element is much bigger. Besides that, when it comes to obviously the Christmas tree, very big for us is, which is probably one thing you don't see here much, at least as far as I know, the nativity set. We have a nativity set that is not just the manger and Joseph and Mary and donkey and whatnot, but it's actually parents still today, obviously smaller than we used to do when we as a kids used to be there. They used to build an entire nativity set, which is on a furniture, and has the mountains, and it's got the houses and all it represents Jerusalem at the time of the birth of Jesus. So that's a big part. Other than that, obviously Santa is the same, the one that travels around the world and gifts to everybody. Probably the thing that we have in Italy that is not here is past Christmas is actually on January 6th, which is the Epiphany.
Yep.
Because the Epiphany, not only being obviously, again, because the religion is very important, but also the fact that for us, we have, just as much as we have Santa or Babbo Natale for Christmas, we have La Befana, which is basically an old lady that comes on the broom, almost like a witch to a certain degree, that brings other gifts. And because obviously the Epiphany celebrates when the three kings arrived, to basically give the gifts to Jesus. And so obviously La Befana brings gifts, in kind of in connection to that historical fact. And so that's why we have that is a thing that doesn't exist here, or at least the Epiphany is not celebrated anyhow. But the rest is pretty much the same. Kids love gifts and Christmas tree, and we love to gather friends and family and enjoy, I think, a special time of the year that hopefully it's good for everybody.
That sounds fun. We appreciate it. Ciro, it's been so good to have you on the show, and I want to wish you and Kim a very happy holiday and Merry Christmas to all our listeners out there. And we'll have to have you on again, Ciro, and we can talk more about Italy and Italian wines. There's so much to cover. We just had to have you on for the holiday this year. Thank you very much, Ciro.
Anytime. I thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kim. Great.
Yeah, thank you for being on with us today.
No, thank you for having me and spend some time together and get the chance to talk about, like I said, a great time of the year. And yes, Merry Christmas or Buon Natale to both of you and your families, and obviously all the people listening. And hopefully we can do it again.
Thank you for joining us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We have been your hosts, Mark and Kim, and our special guest, Ciro Pirone, who you can find on Instagram at Divino Boston. We hope you have a happy holiday. Salute.
Alla salute e buon Natale.
Wine, wine, wine.